welcome to this session on the previous year's questions. This is a continuing series on PYQs on all subjects, and I am taking the discussion on and around the topic of polity. We welcome you to this discussion. As we had discussed last time, certain themes and patterns in understanding what are the forms of questions that are asked in the examination. We're also on our way to understand the recurring and repetitive themes which are a part of the prelims examination. So let's start our discussion with one such theme, which is the political and the social philosophy of Gandhiji. Okay, so in the recent years, we have seen the movement of the questions from strictly domain specific questions on constitution, governance, etc., to the questions upon polity, on the political thought of certain founding fathers, and especially in the case of Gandhi. Okay, so this is a question from 2020. Let's read the question. One common agreement between Gandhiism and Marxism is 2020. By God, quite a dichotomous comparison over here. It takes a lot for someone to compare Gandhi and Marx, though both of them were revolutionary radical thinkers. In some way they were common. So let's see what the answer to this could be. A, the final goal of a stateless society. Yes, indeed, this is the correct answer. Let's just mark the correct answer for now. I will come to explain it to later. Let's read the other options also. Class struggle, abolition of private property, and economic determinism. Let's take our understanding of the last option first. D, economic determinism. Now, as some of the students of political theory and political thought would know, that Marx based his sociology on economics. He based his politics on economics, which means to say that Marx was classified or self-classified, self-acclaimed historical materialist, in which he made a point that the movement of history, which means the movement of human consciousness, is determined by the movement of material in the world, in the political, social, economic spheres, which means to say that the owners of the means of production determine the kind of thought, the culture, the states, the regimes of power and domination arise. That means to say that it is economics which determines everything. So economic determinism is something we find in Marx, but we don't find it in Gandhi. What we find in Gandhi is a kind of a spiritual determination, a determinism, a kind of a determinism of the conscience. It is the inherent battle between the good and the bad, the violent and the non-violent, the tolerant and the intolerant, which determines the shape of history. So here I think a good replacement to this would be what we could call spiritual determinism. They were both, if Marx was a materialist thinker, Gandhi was a spiritual thinker. Abolition of private property is also linked to Marx, as students of political thought and sociology and political theory would know that Marx believed that eventually there will come a point in the society's development where there would be no one allowed to keep private property, where everyone would provide to the society as per his capacity and draw from the society as per his needs, which implies that there is no abolition, there is no concept of private property. Indeed, this is one of the basic substantial values in Marxism, but not so for Gandhi. In fact, in Gandhi we see something not exactly capitalistic or private property propagation, but what he called the trusteeship concept. In trusteeship concept, Gandhi envisaged that the people who own large amount of private property in a society should hold that property and the wealth generated from that property in trust of the not so well off in the society. It should be held as a entrusted property which belongs to the society, but currently is under the administration and disposition of the select few who should act in a manner that it benefits everyone, right? So for instance, the philanthropic and charitable institutions made by Tata is one kind of minor example of the trusteeship concept. Indeed, even in his time, Gandhi, when he was in the middle of the political storm, forging the movement like civil disobedience, non-cooperation, etc., was aided and funded by some wealthy private corporations like the Birlas. And indeed, if you go to some of the Birla Bhavans today, you will find a room which was allotted for Gandhi. There is a Madi Bhavan in Bombay which was made by Birla, and in which Gandhi held residence in Bombay. So he was a patron, he was sort of patronized by these wealthy corporate players, and therefore had a kind of a incorporating tendency. Class struggle. What does class struggle mean for Marxism is, I think, quite self-explanatory, because he always believed the movement of history, the society and the economy to be a conflict between the rich and the poor, which means, to say more technically, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, which means the have and the have-nots. And eventually, according to Marx, a point will come where the distinction between the have and the have-nots will be neutralized, and there would be a communism, a kind of a community coming together and making a pool of resources available for everyone, which will not even require a state. And that's what brings us to the common ground between the two thinkers. Marx arrives at a state-led society on the basis of these three principles, but Gandhi arrives at the concept of stateless society from the concept of human sovereignty, in which he believes that human beings, by virtue of being gifted with the element of conscience, do not need instruction from anyone else as to how to lead a good life. Human beings have the element of Swaraj, which they can activate and feel in control and in command of all their actions, which makes the state a kind of an unnecessary fixture. So both Gandhi and Marx believed in statelessness, or in technical terms, anarchy, but both arrive at the conclusion from very different angles and ends. Okay, so the correct answer over is A. Let's take a look at some of the other possibilities in which questions can be framed around Gandhi. These are some important elements in Gandhi's political thought. Number one, Hind Swaraj. Hind Swaraj, as you know, is the text written by Gandhi. It is indeed one of the only political theory or political idea discussion ever penned by Gandhi, but it has a powerful impact. Some claim it to be a political theory work of original value, and it elaborates the idea of eventual dominion of the human conscience and the eventual unnecessity of the state. Hind Swaraj, which means the republic of the self, and which has been made a writ large into what he envisaged the Indian civilization to adopt. Republic of the village is a concept which Gandhi always believed in. He believed in decentralization of power. He never believed in great nation states and union centric governments. He believed in the local authorities, local autonomies given to the smaller units within the polity, which were the villages. And he did not like the idea that people had to go from villages to towns and to cities to seek job and social security and protection. He wanted villages to be self-sufficient, make their own economy work, make their own society work, and have the autonomy over their everyday life in terms of political and social electoral rights, which is later translated into Panchayati Raj, etc. Statelessness is, again, what we discuss now is the concept of anarchy refined for Gandhi, which means that he believed that eventually state will not have any function, or state should not have any function in regulating human affairs. Humans should evolve to the point of being self-regulating, which is the meaning of the term Swaraj. Non-cooperation and civil disobedience. What this means is that in the meantime, when you have a state which is tyrannical, authoritative, and oppressive, there is a birthright morality in opposing that state, in not obeying that state, but keeping in mind that such disobedience must not result in uncivility and especially in violence. So the concept of civil disobedience and non-cooperation are inherent to Gandhi's political idea. The concept of civil disobedience has been borrowed by Gandhi from Henry David Thoreau, who's an American writer classified under the category of American transcendentalists. Welfare is another important aspect for Gandhi. If you look at the directive principle of state policies, as long as there is a state, as long as there is a necessity of a state, the state must make policies with the idea of the Gandhian talisman, which he called that every time there is a dilemma as to what kind of a policy must be made by the state, the public policy figures should keep this image in mind, that how does this policy benefit the poorest and the most vulnerable people within a country, right? The concept of welfare, as has been given in various articles under the Constitution, especially under the directive principle of state policy. Trusteeship we have discussed. and non-violence is, of course, inherent to everything that Gandhi proposed and envisaged and acted upon, the concept of ahimsa. Okay. So these are few things which you can find relevant in answering questions related to Gandhi's political ideas. Let's move on to the next question. In the context of India, which one of the following is the characteristic appropriate for bureaucracy? It's a very good question. Perhaps you would call it a simple question. Yes, the answer, to arrive at this answer is not very difficult. I think one could fairly intelligently guess. But our task is also to elaborate all the points properly so that any hidden information can be used in the future. An agency for widening the scope of parliamentary democracy. Now, the implication by this statement is that there is an agency, which is bureaucracy, which can widen the scope of parliamentary democracy. A very elementary question that we understand is that does the bureaucracy have any role to play in politics? Because you can't widen the scope of democracy by involving yourself directly or indirectly into political affairs. Now, in ethics, we read the number of values associated with are called non-partisanship, which means that you will not favor any party as a bureaucrat. These are code of conducts for administrations. Or bipartisanship, that you will try to learn and to adapt the frameworks and ideas of both the political parties or all political parties without favoring anyone in particular, or what you call political neutrality. Now, all of these are strict commandments to the administrators to not involve directly or indirectly into political affairs. So the question of widening the scope of public democracy being a characteristic for bureaucracy does not even arise. It is incorrect to start with. An agency for strengthening the structure of federalism. Now, when the institutional founders of bureaucracy, for instance, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, when we read his writings, we find a very clear understanding that the All India services, which is the highest echelons of bureaucracy, were envisaged as ambassadors of the union to the states. These are going to be the members recruited by the union government and instituted in different states, and they are supposed to make sure that the states do not withdraw from the union, the states do not have too much resentment against the union, and don't start a disintegration of the republican process. So if anything, this statement should be reversed. It is an agency for strengthening the structure of the union government as opposed to the federal units. As you know, the constitution is envisaged with a stronger union. Centralizing tendencies overtake the federating units. So this is incorrect because it should be arranged in the other order. An agency for facilitating political stability and economic growth. Again, the term political. Now, the political term, let's imagine a scenario in which you are posted in a state where the president rule has been declared, which means that there is a state emergency, which means that there is political instability. And that entails that you as a bureaucrat must follow the rule book, the constitution, and the different laws which inform your exercise of power. You are not there to make political stability a possibility. That is for the politicians to do. That is for the bigger players in the entire society to do. Your job is not to facilitate political stability. Your job is not to interfere with any of the political matters. You don't have to worry about when order and political stability will be restored in a particular state. You just have to concentrate upon following your duty as per the rule of law. An agency for the implementation of public policy. This is indeed the correct answer. Okay, as you know, public policy is the domain of the administration in terms of implementation. So we say this is a simple triad, that the legislature makes the laws, the executive makes the policies, and the administration implements the laws and the policies. Laws and the policies can simply be referred to sometime by the common determinator term called public policy. So this is the correct answer. Okay, so we discussed two themes today, and there are more to follow, and we will carry on our dissection process of these points, because something or the other will inform a better understanding and perhaps even ability to score marks in the coming examination. So please stick with us for the next sessions also. Thank you for your time.